Welcome back to What the Fertility. This morning we have on with us Jolene from Motherhood Off the Rails. It is a podcast on stories of infertility, miscarriages, infant loss, adoption, motherhood, and so much more. We can't wait to just even hear your story and then how it even led to a podcast and kind of what you're doing in this community. We're just so excited that you're here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad that this early time worked out and that our significant others are wrangling our children so we can do this morning.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you want to kind of just even start from the beginning of like, did you go through your own infertility that then led you to a podcast, or kind of just share with us how it all began?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this. We were just chatting before we recorded that I really love being a guest way more than a host because I don't have to do anything after this. It's great. Right. Producing 6 seasons kind of wears on you. So I'm excited to be a guest and been following you guys for a while. So I'm just excited that we get to connect this morning. So yeah, my name is Jolene. I have been married for about 5.5 years. We have a 3.5-year-old boy. We have a rainbow baby girl who'll be 9 months. And we have an angel baby that we lost in 2023. That's kind of like the catalyst for this all. So I'll just jump in. My pregnancy with my son was textbook, easy, not a single problem. Just an amazing, beautiful pregnancy that I loved so much. So when he was about 1.5 years, my husband and I were just like, hey, I think it's time for our second and our last. We've always been on the 2 train. Like I always say, I don't want any more kids than I have hands because my husband and I cannot be outnumbered. So we knew that we always wanted 2. And so when our son was 1.5 years, we started trying, and shocker of all shockers, we got pregnant on the first try, which does not happen for us. When it actually works, it takes us a little bit longer. So we were very shocked and surprised, but obviously excited. So January 9th, 2023 is when I took that test, and I kind of already knew because my period's very predictable, and I was like, okay, I'm pregnant. Let's just take the test to confirm it. And that was a whirlwind of a week. It's crazy how I forgot what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I can remember every single detail of that week. I remember getting these very comfy maternity leggings that I wore throughout my entire pregnancy with my daughter. And just little things like my husband and I got a date night. We were able to go out and celebrate, and we started talking about our future with 2 kids. And that same exact night, on our way back from our date night, I felt a very sharp pain. Our motherhood instinct, I knew exactly what it was. I didn't say anything to my husband. I didn't want to alarm him at first. Went to bed that night and woke up in just like a pool of blood. And I remember just walking down the stairs and falling into his arms and just crying. I wasn't even able to get out what had happened, but I knew, because my best friend, she was the second story on the podcast right after mine, she had 2 miscarriages just less than a year earlier. And so I texted her immediately and I was like, hey, I think this is what it is. She's like, give it a little bit. Sometimes bleeding is normal, but I just knew. So that was January 15. And I passed the baby on January 16th, just in my home. I was fortunate enough I didn't have to go to the emergency room. It truly was like a heavy period, even though that is not the norm, despite what all the physicians say. So it was a tender moment that my husband and I shared. I just wrapped it up in like a tissue and buried it in a little tin in our backyard. And that's been, 2 years now. And so I remember laying in bed, just crying and weeping and taking what little time I could for myself with an 18-month-old. And I had this voice instinct that came to me and said, now you know. And I took that to mean, now you know what everybody else has been through. Like up until that point, I hadn't had any great loss. I had lost some grandparents, but it was expected. And so I took that instinct, that voice to mean, okay, now you know what your best friend has gone through. Now you know what so many other women have walked through. And so a few, maybe weeks, months later, I was journaling because that is a huge part of just like who I am and what I do. And I started writing a list of women that I knew personally through my university undergrad time, just, here in the area, that had walked through some type of infertility or loss. And in that quick little journaling session, I came up with a list of about 20 or 30 women that I knew personally that had walked through some type of loss. And I just had the gut feeling that I had to do something about this. I was like, there needs to be some type of platform. And I hadn't really searched through the loss and fertility side of social media because during my healing, I couldn't throw myself into that because it just made it worse for me. And so that's when I the seed started to germinate, and I was like, what is it going to look like to start a podcast? I did all my own research. And so my loss happened in January. I would say around March or April, I was in a women's Bible study group. And I knew 2 out of the 6, maybe. There's a very small group of moms. And that night when we first met, I just had this urge to share my story. I hadn't shared it outside of my home and with my best friends. And the story just kind of word vomited out of me. And come to find out, every single one of those 6 women had walked through some type of loss. Wow. They either had to do failed IVF or IUI, or had to do embryo adoption, or was in the midst of postpartum depression and anxiety. And that was just the final cherry on top. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. So my husband bought me a microphone for our anniversary. And I just dove head first in. I started with my story. In the first season, except for one, we're all my close family and friends who I knew had walked through loss. Because I was like, you guys need to be my guinea pigs. Come and help me. And I set up, our social media presence, and it just snowballed from there. So that was the summer of 2023. And the month we launched season 1 was the month we got pregnant with our rainbow baby. And the month I should have delivered our loss. So just the timing was just I hate to throw the word divine around because I know people have a lot of, baggage with that sometimes, but that's what it was for me. It was just this culmination of my dream of a podcast and my dream of a rainbow baby girl coming together all at the same time. So we now are about halfway through season 5. We have close to 50 stories, 50 women who have shared their stories, who have bared their souls on the internet, and gone back to some of the darkest moments in their lives. And I just feel so privileged that complete strangers met me on the internet and be like, yeah, I'd love to share the deepest, darkest time in my life with you. Why not? And it's just been this beautiful thing. I've made connections. One of my favorites is a friend who, when we were trying to, set up a time to record and everything, we had a date set, and then she messaged me. She's like, I can't. She's like, full disclosure, I'm 11 weeks pregnant with my rainbow baby, and I'm in a lot of anxiety. And I messaged her back. I was like, I too am 11 weeks pregnant with my rainbow baby and haven't told anybody. And so we got to walk through our rainbow baby pregnancies together. And so our babies were born just a week apart. And so that in itself was something I obviously never expected to happen. But now we're friends on our own personal social medias, and we just get to see our own personal lives. We've never met in person. We live in completely different parts of the country. But there's just little things like that. I mean, I could go on forever about all the different connections I've made and all the things that it's taught me. The biggest one, though, and kind of I feel like the capstone on all of this is, before I was a mom, I was a teacher for almost 10 years. And through motherhood and just the world the way it is, I knew I didn't want to go back to teaching. So I was like, okay, what's my second career going to be? And soon after my loss, I started going to therapy. And through that, and through all of the stories that I have helped tell, and these women that I have walked through the deepest, darkest grief, I am now starting my master's next month to be a marriage and family therapist. And so, thank you. I just hope that I can take what I've already learned, and the ultimate dream down the road is to start my own practice where I specialize in women that have walked through loss and women going through postpartum depression and anxiety the whole thing. So just basically take what I did in the podcast,
Yeah.
but get licensed and paid for it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's the dream then.
Yeah. So that's me and my big old story in one little nutshell.
I love
It's
it.
it's so interesting. So when you first started out sharing your story and you said, you texted your best friend because she had gone through that. Before you even said you heard this voice in your head where you're like, now you know. That was gonna be my first question to you. When you immediately texted her, did you replay kind of when she had gone through that and how you had felt towards her, not towards her, but about the situation, and then you go through it and you're like, oh my gosh, the gravity of this is so much different than what I probably thought it was when she was going through it. Was that an experience you had?
100%. And it took me a while to kind of step out of my own grief to think back and be like, dang, I was not as good of a friend as I should have been through her two losses. And I actually I texted her and sent this huge message. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I had no idea, but now I do. And so, yeah, it completely changed my mindset around my best friend's loss and so many losses around me. Yeah. Now I knew what they were walking through, and now I was able to go back and be like, hey, I wasn't there for you then, but I'm trying to make up for it now.
I think, and I don't know, Amanda, I feel like you're more of a very empathetic person. Amanda actually has her master's in counseling as well. So maybe you two
Cool.
should connect.
Yes.
But for me, I think my biggest, with my first miscarriage, the biggest thing that I had learned was just wow, the empathy I have for not only even miscarriage, but for other types of loss or devastating situations. I was like, this is probably so much bigger for that person than I can even understand until you actually go through it. So that is just so crazy how that's what I was thinking. And then you're like, that's full circle why I started the podcast.
Tell me you're lost moms without telling me you're lost moms.
I know. Oh my goodness. Oh, well, that is amazing though that, even you were saying how I guess it was the baby would have been born on that same month that
In September, yeah.
well, I mean, that's just such a healing moment, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's solidified that everything you're doing is probably where you're supposed to be.
Oh, exactly. And I did intentionally launch season 1 in September of 2023 because I knew that would have been my due date. So that was very intentional. But getting pregnant when we should have delivered, that was not our timing because we tried for probably about 6 months to get pregnant with our rainbow girl. And even the tiniest things, I don't know, if I actually ovulated that month, I obviously had to have, but my surge wasn't it's still a mystery how we got pregnant that month. She is truly a miracle. And yeah.
Well, we love what you're doing. So maybe let's dive into your podcast just a little bit more because I feel like our podcast is so intentionally labeled as What the Fertility because we love to hear all types of family building stories, right? Not just you had infertility and this is what we want to talk about. I feel like we were very thoughtful with the way we named it. So for yours, Motherhood Off the Rails, I love your tagline. Tell us a little bit more about kind of what type of guests you have on or what listeners could expect if they pop over to your podcast.
Yeah, I cannot take credit for the name. When I was brainstorming what the podcast was even going to look like, I had a meeting with my two best friends who have walked through. So one walked through secondary infertility, and my other best friend had the two miscarriages. So it's I want their input on this. So my friend who walked through secondary infertility, Olivia, she was on, I think, season 4. She came up with the name of the idea. So I cannot take any credit for that. But it was just it was the only name we came up with. It was just oh my goodness, this is perfect. Because I didn't want to, if I took it longer, I mean, because I'm going to be a therapist and start going back to school, I can't do past season 6 because I can't be a podcaster and a mom and master's student all at the same time. If I was going to take it further, I would want to expand it outside of loss. And some of the stories have been outside of loss. So one story we actually just had this week, she didn't physically lose a child, but she had severe postpartum depression and anxiety. A story we had earlier on in the seasons, she didn't physically lose a child, but with her first child, she found out that her mom had brain cancer and her mom passed away before she had her second. And so that was another layer in the motherhood loss. One of my closest friends on season 1, she didn't physically lose a child, but she had severe medical issues when she was pregnant with her third. And so if I was to take this podcast even further than what it is, I would want to encompass mothers and sharing their daily off the rails moments of toddler life, of adjusting to a new baby, because that's not talked about enough. Like, thankfully, there are so many podcasts like our own that dive deep and headlong into loss. But I also wanted eventually to give a space to moms who just wanted to vent and be like, my toddler was driving me crazy today, and I want to know that I'm not alone. So, yes.
I love that. I think the three of us are testaments to that. And just saying, like, all three of us now are moms. I mean, the three of us walk through infertility. I think it's such a good place for listeners after they have like dug through their infertility journey, their family growing journey with us. And they're like, okay, I don't want to listen to this sad, depressing stuff anymore. Maybe let me pop over to a motherhood podcast. So, I mean, that's so great that you share that. And I think even women with infertility, with loss history, once they become a mother, they do go through all those things that you're talking about.
Yes.
Gosh, myself, postpartum anxiety or like really crazy family medical issues. I think that's so great that you're doing that. And yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I wish I could do more of it, because I will say, though, that still a majority of our stories that we have told through these almost 6 seasons are about loss and are about extremely heavy loss. I mean, my cousin shared her story about her daughter she lost at 6 months because of a heart condition. And we have had several stillbirth stories that, I mean, it's very, very heavy. And I had to be very careful especially when I was pregnant with my rainbow baby, because my anxiety was the highest it's ever been. There were and are some stories that I have not gone back to listen to, because you record them, you edit them, and then you have to hear them again. And it's hearing this story 3 times that is extremely heavy if you are walking through your pregnancy after loss journey. So I do give all of the warnings and all the heads up in all of our show notes. There's the topics, what the story is going to be about. And I tell people, like, sometimes the story is going to be very heavy. And like, if you don't listen to my podcast, that's okay, because you have to be in this right mindset. And so
you're spot on. I don't know how you do it without a partner. Amanda and I will filter out. If you ever hear some of our episodes where it's just one of us, it's because one of us have been like, not today. We can't do that topic today.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know how. It is because my husband is a rock star dad and takes the kids whenever I need to record or edit or whatever. He is my partner in real life, but also my side partner for the podcast. But yeah, I think that's another reason why I am thankful to take, a very long extended break after season 6, just because, yes, I have walked through that loss, but I am ready to take what I have learned and I'm ready to pour it into the lives, learn clinically how to pour it into the lives of other women. Because I don't know if you guys have watched the show Shrinking on Apple TV.
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
Yes,
I've never seen it.
Oh, as a counselor, girl, you are going to love it.
Wait, Amanda, it is so good. My husband and I, that is like our little guilty pleasure at night. Like we will, and they just had a
new show. I'm so excited.
Is it on Apple?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Sorry,
watch
I was
it.
so excited about
it. Girl, I'm excited too. Yeah, we binged the first 2 seasons in entirely too short amount of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's about this group of therapists and just their lives in and out of the therapy office. But one of the quotes, and I'm going to misquote it, but it says something like, we heal others to heal ourselves. And I heard that and I quickly put it down. I put it into my application essay for my master's program, just because that's my goal. Like, I have been healed and I'm still healing through my own therapy journey, through so many of these women's stories, because through their stories, a lot of my own comes back up. And so I'm just so excited to take the big amount of healing that I have and to take it and learn from it and to give it and pass it on to others. So that's kind of the season I'm in. Like you're right. We walked through our loss and it taught us so much, but we're ready to be moms. We're ready to move on to our next chapter now.
Yeah. That's incredible. Well, thank you so much. How can everyone find your podcast if they wanted to listen? Where are you on? Or if you want to tell us your Instagram account, if you could just
Yeah,
share with us. Yeah.
definitely. It's easy to find. You can just search for Motherhood Off the Rails on Instagram. I tried out TikTok for a while. I can't do two different social medias at
It's
once.
so hard. We're
Nope.
in the same boat
Right.
right now.
Nope, nope. And when like TikTok went down for like a hot minute, I was like, phew, glad I missed that boat. So yeah, so
Exactly.
just search for us on Instagram, Motherhood Off the Rails, and then search the same exact thing on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We made it super easy. Yeah, give it a listen when you're in the right headspace. Like I went into this podcast never intent on the highest numbers or the highest downloads. Like I've tried to get ad sponsors and they're like, you don't have enough downloads. I'm like, okay, well, that's a sign. Just because it is very heavy. And so I never expected us to, be viral or anything. And the 1,000 followers we have on Instagram, I'm very happy with because everybody that's following along, I hope is finding community in their own loss because that's kind of our tagline, your story, no matter how big or small, matters. So, yeah, that's us.
That's
Thank
amazing.
you so much.